Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning into today's program. We apologize for the delay. We're experiencing some audio technical difficulties. Thank you for tuning into today's program. We apologize for the delay. All right, we're kind of waiting for the whole group to stream in, and as we're waiting for the majority of folks, I just want to get some CLE housekeeping out of the way. If you are attending today's program for CLE credit, all you have to do is complete the poll that will be administered during this program and complete the brief survey that will be sent following the program's conclusion. If you have any questions during today's program, please enter those into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also communicate with us through the chat as well. And with that, I will turn it over to our community programs specialist, Siobhan Nash. She's going to give us an overview of today's topic, give us some context, and the floor is yours. Take it away, Siobhan.
Thanks, Dominica. Hi, my name is Siobhan Nash. I am the Community and Pro Bono Program Specialist here at the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. In that space, I work with a lot of our programs that do early introduction to law-related education, which takes us into the classrooms of public schools in Ohio. So I wanted to give a brief introduction to the conversation that our very qualified panelists will kind of take away in just a second here. So I'm going to share my screen to give some context here. Let's see. All right. All right, so this is just a brief, like I said, a brief introduction. And so what we're talking about today basically is how different states, or what the conversation came about is how different states are kind of combating the Great Resignation and the teacher shortage. So according to ABC News, as of June of 2022, the National Education Association estimated about a 300,000 person teacher shortage across the country. And so these are just some clips of, what we're seeing on social media, in the media, in the press about what's happening in those public classrooms regarding teacher licensing and the teacher shortage. So that kind of brings us to what do we do now, right? So there are some states that have try to make modifications to legislation and policy to kind of combat this issue. So in Alabama, there is House Bill 307 that modifies the issuance of professional educator certificates to individuals if they complete an alternative route to a teacher preparation program. Then in Arizona, there is Senate Bill 1159. That requires a modification to individuals who need only to be enrolled in a pursuit of a degree to begin their classroom teaching. And previously, this was held to students who had achieved a certain number of credit hours before they could go into those classrooms and begin the teaching in-classroom teaching. In Florida, we have Senate Bill 896, Educator Certification Pathways for Veterans. This allows veterans and their spouses to apply for a 5-year teaching certification or teaching voucher with no degree. Veterans must serve a minimum of 48 months of service and have an honorable or medical discharge. In Oklahoma, there is House Bill 3658. This requires that Oklahoma Teacher Preparation Act, and it removes the requirement of those to pass the general education portion of the competency exam in that state. So there are others that have made different modifications. These are just some of the ones that we kind of pulled out to give a preface on today's conversation. And then there is what Ohio is doing. So that's why we're here today. And that's why we have this panel assembled, and we will talk about what Ohio looks like in the same space. And so here is House Bill 583, and it talks about the temporary non-bachelor substitute teaching license, which is a 1-year license. And we have a very esteemed panel here who I will very briefly introduce now. We have as moderator Adrian Thompson, who is the president of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association and partner in charge, chief of diversity officer with TAF. Speakers, our panelists are Karen Thompson, Chief of Staff, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, Jeff Wensing, Vice President of Ohio Education Association, and Thomas McGee, Director, Office of Educator Licensure with Ohio Department of Education. At this time, I'll turn it over to Adrian and the panelists to begin their discussion. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Thanks, Siobhan. So, Tom, I'm going to start with you. Why House Bill 583? Why now? And what was the impetus behind the bill?
Well, I don't want to necessarily speak for legislators themselves because I was not in on those discussions, but I'll let you know what I perceive from my perspective. The original, this is actually a continuation of flexibility that's been in place since this winter of like 2020, 2021. So kind of early in the pandemic, I think the legislature recognized that we needed substitutes, that was a real struggle. The demand for substitutes is a lot higher, I think, because, you know, with the positive COVID test, you're looking at having an educator out for a fairly lengthy amount of time. And so this flexibility was given at that point in time and has been continued. It was continued for last school year, and then the legislature looked at continuing it for the next 2 school years. I do think that the legislature is looking at maybe some long-term changes to how we do substitute licensing in Ohio. And this is sort of to, I don't want to say fill the gap until they have a chance to really look at this issue and come up with long-term solutions. So I think that's kind of the impetus of where this has come from.
Okay, thanks, Tom. But Ohio already had alternate pathways to education to try to fill that gap before. And this is necessary now in your perspective, from your perspective, or from the OD's perspective?
So we had alternate routes for full teacher licensure. So individuals who are looking at getting, you know, the full license as a teacher. I think this was to address the need for substitute teaching licenses. The requirement in Ohio up until that, you know, the precursor to House Bill 583 was basically the only requirement was to have a bachelor's degree. If an individual had a bachelor's degree, they could get a temporary substitute teaching license. Or I'm sorry, they could get a regular substitute teaching license. And that's the only requirement that was in place to get a substitute license, as well as a district, you know, being hired in at a district as a substitute teacher. And so I think they were looking at this as kind of the one requirement. So that's the requirement that they looked to remove, to make it, you know, as easy, as flexible as possible for districts. And I want to say it is a big part of this bill that the districts are to set their own educational requirements for so it's not just anybody can get a license. It's putting giving the districts the authority to say who are the right people for us to put in our district as subs.
Thanks, Karen. And Jeff, I'm going to ask you for your initial perspectives, starting with Karen.
Sure. So just building on what Tom said, and I think it's key, the last part that he shared, which is districts then do have the autonomy to really think about who they would bring in that would fall under that criteria. And I can tell you one of the things that we worked really hard to do is to expand our partnerships. And so we'll look to our university partners, and there may be college students that have we're not just looking at in the education track, but in content areas. And we will, you know, through partnerships, reach out and see if somebody would like to have a temporary sub licensure that we can bring in through that route. It is not, from my perspective, it is not the ideal state, but it is an opportunity at a local level to think creatively and think carefully about who you want to partner with, assessing the candidates that you would bring in, and then making a determination if you would want to offer them a temporary sub-licensure, and sometimes with the hope then that they would go through the alternative licensure way and then go through and get their teaching degree. And I will share through some of our out-of-school providers, we do have it, and it's just one, but we do have one individual that she was an artist in residence and then became a long-term sub and is now going through an alternative licensure to get her teaching certification. So there can be some positives if you're thinking about it creatively, but we do have a shortage, and it is something we deal with on a daily basis.
Thanks, Karen.
Mhm.
Jeff, first, congratulations on getting the students and the teens back in school in Columbus, and just to like to hear your initial perspective.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be on this panel, Adrian, and appreciate that opportunity. I think the question is like, why now? So when this bill was originally proposed, it was to extend it for 3 years. These requirements that I mentioned in the bill, previously to that, you need to have a bachelor's degree to be a substitute in Ohio. So they dropped the requirements down a little bit. We were in favor of just extending it for a year, and they landed, I guess, in the middle with a 2-year extension of those provisions. So number one, why? Because there aren't enough individuals interested in subbing in districts. And that's a real problem, for our educators, it's a problem. And I use the term educator because the Ohio Education Association is made up of classroom teachers. We have cover bus drivers, cafeteria workers, school secretaries. So I know we're talking about teachers right now, but there's an educator shortage, including those areas that I mentioned earlier. And if you ever take the time to look by any board office that you might drive by or a school, they are generally advertising for bus drivers. There's a big bus driver shortage too. So why are we doing this? Because, we're trying to attract people into those jobs. It puts a lot of stress, a lot of pressure already that are people are at their high levels. You might say some of them are at their breaking points. Because when you don't have enough substitutes, especially in the buildings, you have to be creative as to how you're going to make sure those kids have an adult with them. You don't want to put them in study halls and have them just sit there all day. I mean, that's not a great choice, but it's sometimes a last resort. So if there is a shortage of subs at some elementary levels, they have to split the classes. So if there's a 3rd grade team and the 3rd grade teacher, one of the 3rd grade teachers is out, they might split the kids between the other 3rd grade teachers. And of course, you're going then from maybe 25 kids in a class, and maybe you're taking on another 10 or 12 or whatever is in that class. So that's a lot of students in that day. So yes, the need is there. We are very interested in putting highly qualified, skilled educators in front of our students. We're not interested in watering down the requirements. We still got to make sure they pass the background checks, but keeping all of that in mind, yes, we're trying to be creative and look at ways that we can provide some relief to all of our educators when people do get sick, and during the pandemic, teachers, educators get sick. That's just the reality. And how do we handle that responsibly and be doing right by our kids and our communities when people are out?
Yeah. Jeff, I want to come back to why educators are opting out from your perspective, from all of your perspectives. But now I'm going to put on my hat as a parent. And I want you guys to convince me that this change is in the best interest of students. And I'll start with you, Karen.
I thought it was Jeff. Okay. So just a couple of things, Adrian. I think districts, whether you're a small district, a rural district, or an urban district as we are, I want to put it in context. We have on average 550 staff members call off on a day. And that's across the board. And our highest, our highest open positions right now are paraprofessionals. We have about a 35% open rate there. Our teaching positions, we currently have 25 teaching positions that we still need to close, which, given where we were at starting at the beginning of the year, was great. But I think, why now? The more consistency, to get to your question as a parent, what I would want to know, and what we've taken measures to do, and it's hard, but it was the right decision to do in terms of having what we call a permanent building sub in all of our buildings, that at least allows some continuity in terms of the substitute gets to know the staff and the students and the families And so there's some consistency there because we do see people get sick. They get sick, especially at the beginning of the year, if I'm a new teacher, et cetera. And so we have to be prepared for helping to shore that up. I think the more consistency we can have at a school, the less pressure it is for students in terms of what they can expect learning will look like for that day. And so the other place that we have put in place, and I think, you know, other districts are doing it different ways, but what we've chosen to do is we have 6 regions or 6 what we call area superintendents or network leaders in Cleveland. And we're building a list to support those schools of central office staff, because a lot of us come from educational backgrounds. And you know what, for a day or a week or 2 weeks, I can step into a classroom and I can support because I have a teacher's license. I can help manage front office because I have secretarial skill sets. So we've also built extra supports around that. So again, getting to know the schools, getting to know the students, getting to know the network that you're supporting from a central office staff. That's a key thing that we're doing. The more consistency that you have with the community that is supporting the school community, the less disruptive it will be for their educational learning environment. There's still a disruption. Don't want to be naive, but the less they have.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah. And in terms of the shortage, I think we have a big mountain to climb because we're not seeing the numbers there. And so creative ways that we can think about to get second career choices, et cetera, alternative tracks for licensure to get people into the classroom, that makes a difference. And even as I think about high school, you know, maybe thinking creatively about approaches with, I'm teaching at a high school level for this semester, next semester I'm back at the university, you know, just trying to continue to foster unique partnerships to get people into the classrooms, because I think once you're in the classroom, once you're there with students, you want to stay, but it's hard to get there right now. We have a real shortage, and bus drivers also, ESS workers. I mean, districts are hurting.
Thanks, Karen.
Mhm.
Tom, from the state's perspective, what are you hearing from parents, and what's the state doing to address their concerns?
I think from, you know, from at least my perspective, one thing I think that I have heard from talking with districts is, you know, as far as who they're hiring with these temporary licenses, is a lot of them are staff that they already had in the district. So individuals who don't have bachelor's degree, but have worked in the district for a long time, and the district's identified with this person, you know, they know how to work with students. They have the skill set to be successful. And those are the individuals that the districts are putting into the classroom. And you know, kind of going back to, it is a partnership. You know, the licensure requirements are, you know, that's a kind of baseline requirement, but it is ultimately in Ohio, you know, we're a local control state, and we rely on the districts to be making those, you know, those decisions in the best interests of their students, who, I mean, we all want the students to be successful, and so, you know, it's giving flexibility to the districts to get the right people, the best people in front of the classroom that they can find.
Thanks. Jeff, from ODE and the union's perspective, I'm sorry, not ODE, Ohio Education Association, and from the union's perspective, what are you hearing from parents?
Yeah, well, from our perspective is first and foremost, before any education can take place, you have to guarantee that the student is going to be safe and secure. So with the lack of people to fill substitute positions, you know, as we've said, this piece of legislation tries to adjust and open up to more people to be in the building. So you have to have quality adults that are supervising your students that are first and foremost. So beyond that, I mean, if students aren't supervised properly, you know, there's a safety concern. So in the news, we all know what's going on. Parents are highly interested in their kids getting to school safely, and once they're in school safely, that they're able to remain safe during the day and come home safely. So we need to put quality adults in front of them, highly skilled adults, not only to try to deliver instruction in place of their classroom teacher when they're not there, but to make sure that you have an adult supervising them, as well as for the rest of the staff, because you don't want to burn the rest of the staff out as well. So I think it's a double-edged sword when you look at why the restrictions have been, or the qualifications have been kind of massaged a little bit and eased up on.
Thanks. Now, I'm a senior in an urban or rural school district. I've had a difficult time from K through 11 so far. I want to graduate. I want to come in. I don't want to, remote work doesn't work for me. And as a student, I see the new substitute teachers as nothing more than security guards, not educators who are actually helping me with my problems, to help me, through my senior year and to determine what's next for me. But they're nothing more than, security guards, patrolling the hallways and not educating me. Want to hear your guys' response to that from a student's perspective. That's just one perspective, but I'm certain that many students have that perspective.
Yeah, I'll take a opportunity to go first. It's all about relationships with students, building relationships, building credibility, and that trustworthiness. So regardless of whether you're a full-time classroom teacher or you're a substitute in the building, because quite frankly, we've been there. We know when we come to school and we see that, oh, the teacher's out and we have a sub today, unless there's some respect for that sub, it could go a little sideways. So I'm sure that part of those relationships and relationship building skills, if they're not going to come into the situation or into the schools with those individuals may struggle, and quite frankly, they may not last, because if you get into junior high or middle school or high school, you might not have the greatest experience as a sub if you're not building those relationships. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, but first and foremost, as Mr. McGee mentioned, that districts, they have the minimum of the law that they must follow in order to fill substitutes in their building. They can do above and beyond the law, but we should be looking for individuals that need to, are interested in building relationships with the students. And then, as Ms. Thompson said, the concept of hiring, which many districts do, building subs, so that permanent sub is in that building all the time. The students see that substitute there, which gives more opportunity to build those relationships on both sides. So it's a good experience for everybody, for educator and student alike.
Thanks, Jeff. Karen, I'm going to turn to you and just talk about the training, what the district is doing to make certain that when these folks do go into the classroom, they're prepared as possible to actually be an educator or a long-term substitute teacher.
Yep. So with, as many districts do, when we have any new hires, we have an orientation process, and then we also have a teacher mentor and a mentor teacher. So if we have a long-term sub, we will provide supports with an experienced teacher that gives them coaching, mentoring to help. I would say too, for the high school student, for the scenario that you shared, I'm a senior and it's not been a good space or a good journey. The key thing there too is to make sure that we're connecting with the student and the family with the other supports that are available in any school community. So in high school, you have a high school counselor that should be there to help support the journey for the student. You also have in Cleveland and other schools will have it as an advisor, but we partner with College Now to do advising for our students for their career pathway and their college pathway. So it's another support, another relationship I can build, somebody I could connect to if I wasn't connecting with the first individual. And then finally, our family support specialists that are in all of our schools, because of our partnership with Say Yes to Education, Say Yes to Education Cleveland, that individual is a social worker by training. And so they're really, really critical to help connect with the family, help provide those supports. I think in high school, we also have the unique opportunity. We are rich in Cleveland with higher education partners. And when you think about high school, your content at that time connects towards higher education. And so we can get support and expertise from Cleveland State University and John Carroll University, Case University. And so those partnerships matter because they bring authentic learning experiences with the teacher in the classroom, whether it's a long-term sub, a long-term teacher. It brings some different context to that classroom experience. So those are all things that we value, and I think are sometimes undervalued and not known of, to make that a richer experience for the student of what they're experiencing. But for us, the key thing is that I'm calling it mentoring or coaching that we provide, whether you're a short-term or long-term sub. Jeff, you probably know in our contract, in our teachers union contract, we have specific language of how we support our substitute teachers, whether they're short-term subs or long-term subs. And that's because we do work very closely in partnership with our Cleveland Teachers Union to make it the best experience possible for our students. Not always perfect, but we try.
Thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, do you have any information on how many school districts have actually opted in and, said, hey, we want to, utilize the substitute teachers that don't have the degree?
I do not. I know there are some districts who have just said flatly, they have to have a bachelor's degree. We're not going to consider this. I think most districts are, those individuals that they, like I had, said earlier, those that they feel comfortable with, that they already know, and want to put them in the classroom. I kind of get the sense that that's maybe the norm. I don't know that like hard data. I could say that, last year, for example, we issued about 30,000 substitute teaching license, or I'm sorry, 36,000 substitute teaching licenses in total. Of those, 30,000 were our standard license for individuals with a bachelor's degree, which was, that was a very high amount. Like, we are still getting a lot of subs who have bachelor's degrees, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I still think maybe not quite the max we've ever had for a year, but very close. And then we had about 6,000 who had the temporary non-bachelor substitute license. So I don't want to give the impression that most of the subs are these new temporaries. It's still, most people still have that bachelor's degree, about 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 as far as licensees. Now that doesn't guarantee who's working where, but people who hold licenses, about 6,000 were the temporary non-bachelors. And just to real quick on what Karen said, the department is looking too at what resources we can provide for districts to help them with training and preparing substitutes.
That was going to be my next question to you.
Yeah, I'll jump that one then. So that's something we've been interested in a long time, actually, because even those that have bachelor's degrees, that doesn't mean they have any background in education. It doesn't mean that they've ever stepped foot in a classroom as a teacher. It means that they, were able to earn a bachelor's degree. And that bachelor's degree may be in the subject that they're teaching, but it's not, from a licensure standpoint, it's not required. An individual can substitute in different classrooms than what their actual bachelor's degree was in. And so we have, I think we feel renewed urgency or more, to get more resources in the hands of districts to help them with training substitutes, because whether they're these non-bachelor substitutes or substitutes with bachelor's degree, they can all benefit from more training in classroom management, pedagogy, those kinds of topics, because we don't have any, from a licensure standpoint, we don't have any guarantee that they have that coming in. And I think we all know that that's important if we're going to put them in a position to be successful. I think the other part, the way we look at it from the state's perspective, that recruitment is important, and recruiting individuals into the profession is a goal, very important, but retaining those individuals is also important. And so when we're looking at, things like licensure requirements or what individuals are doing before they walk into the classroom, we want to put individuals in a position to succeed. And if you just lower licensure requirements, and you're not ensuring that they, they know the subject matter they're teaching, or that they have that, background in how to be a teacher, how to manage a classroom, they're going to burn out. You're going to have them for a year. You're not building a long-term relationship where this person is going to want to continue to be in education. So I think not everything is necessarily, a licensure requirement. Sometimes it's about the supports that you build around that individual so that you can bring them along to be the kind of educators that we all want.
All right. I'm gonna ask all three of you a tough question from your perspective. Why are educators dropping out? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Well, if you've watched any of the news shows recently, there's various reasons. There's usually the top three reasons, whether it's burnout has been a reason, stress is a reason, and support. So our educators need supported. I know for a fact, because I tour the state of Ohio and I visit our locals and I talk to our educators, and there are powerful administrators are powerful, right? They can make or break your building. So there are, I tell the story all the time of the greatest principal in the world I ever had. His name was John Spinner. I taught in Parma City schools for 26 years. And the best principal I had was in my first 3 years at Hillside Junior High. It's now Hillside Middle School. The man was fantastic. He should have taught classes on how to be an administrator. You just felt supported by Mr. Spinner. So going around the state, if educators, teachers, classroom teachers are in a building and they're not feeling supported from one way or the other, they are leaving the profession. That's the number one reason that I've come across. I've talked to educators in Youngstown. I was up there last year at the end of the year in the spring, and I had some difficult conversations with educators there. They knew what they were getting into. They wanted to be in Youngstown. They wanted to be in an urban school. They knew the challenges of being a teacher in Youngstown, and they weren't leaving because of that. They weren't leaving because of the salary. They were leaving because they didn't feel supported. And I think that's a common theme throughout. So I just emphasize that we're in this together. Karen mentioned earlier that she believes that the Cleveland Teachers Union and Cleveland Metropolitan School District work well together. So we are in this together, and whether you're a substitute or a classroom teacher, you just need to feel that when you're in difficult, challenging times, that you will be supported.
Thanks. Karen, what are you saying? Building upon what Jeff said.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Jeff. I thought you outlined it nicely. There is a sense of fatigue. The pandemic brought just a sense of uncertainty. And it's been an up and down and an up and down. And I think it just accelerated for adults as well as for students when they came back to school. I do think that, and we're all working to do that. I can say we meet weekly. Eric, our CEO, meets weekly with Sherry Obrinsky, our president of the Teachers Union. And we also meet weekly with the president of the Principals Association. And then the four of us will come together and meet on a regular basis. And it's really important because you need to have both perspectives so that what can we do to shore up? How can we build community? What flexibilities can we continue to support the schools with so that it feels the best learning environment for those adults at that school. And so we do a lot of work around that. I would also, you're going to hear this from me a lot, but I do, partnerships matter. And belonging to the Ohio 8, which is the 8 urban districts across our state, Akron, Canton, Cincinnati, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, and Youngstown with Cleveland. And, they come together. It's union leadership and superintendent leadership on a monthly basis to talk about these topics and share ideas and look at where we need to advocate for. But I have to tell you, I'm starting my 32nd year in Cleveland, my 36th year in education, and I have never seen such fatigue, sense of just, I'm tired and I want to take a break, of I would say mid-career educators. And so that's concerning.
Yeah. Karen, when you say midterm educators, can you give us an experience range?
Yeah, I would say like in that 15 to 20 range, 20-year range. And you know, the newer ones we're getting in and connecting with, but it's just some in the mid-year, just saying, I'm done, I need a change, I want to do something else.
Did you see this prior to COVID? Or has
No.
this? Yeah.
Yeah, well, let me say it may have been happening, but it wasn't, I was not aware of it. We did not see that type of exodus, no.
Right. And Tom, this seems to be, it's not an urban issue, but it's happening at, suburban and rural districts. What's the state's perspective? We've talked a lot. I know you don't speak for the board or for the legislature, but from your perspective,
I think that, the education specific things that Jeff and Karen mentioned absolutely are at play. The other thing I think we would be remiss to say is where we are in every field. I mean, every field is hurting for individuals. Everyone's competing for workers right now. And I think that, to some extent, if there are more people taking a look, as Karen said, they'll find opportunities in other fields. I can go work in HR, or I can be a trainer in another district and still use my education, but not be specifically an educator. And I think that is at play here. When I talked with our data people, they indicated that traditionally, when you look at teacher turnover, so individuals or educator turnover, people leaving year to year, it tracks very closely with unemployment. When unemployment is high, you retain your teachers better. When unemployment is very low, you're more likely to lose educators, because I think just macroeconomic, I don't know, I am not at all qualified. I'm just passing along the tidbit that I heard.
right.
And I do think those are, like, that's part of the whole conversation, but I think there are factors that are unique to education and the stress that educators are under and the pressure. And so that, I think weighs overall on educator morale, which then has that, that's what impact you see as a result.
Right. Thanks. We talked a lot before about recruitment and retention. So let's start with recruitment. How do we make the teaching profession or the education profession more attractive to not only young people, but people that want to, another career, who are opting out? What do we do? And I'll start with you, Tom, from ODE's perspective.
Sure. I think that, when we talk about recruiting educators, I think, our goal is to find ways to bring people into the education profession without really diminishing the quality of our educators. And so we were, the first kind of places that we've been looking was those that had already recruiting back those that had already left the profession. So into people who had teaching licenses and had let them lapse because for 100 different reasons. And so back in December of 2021, we made it much easier for individuals to return if their license had been expired for more than a year and they had a district that wanted to hire them, meaning they were the best person for the position, we would go ahead and give them a reinstatement license and let them start working immediately, as opposed to before they would have had to gone back and done college coursework before they could bring their license back to active. We also lowered the amount of coursework that's available to individuals, or the amount of coursework that's required to bring a license back to active, looking to recruit those people who had already been educators back. We also the state used a portion of its ESSER funds to fund educator workforce shortage grants for educator preparation programs. So we looked to the educator preparation programs to come up with creative ideas in order to address workforce shortage and handed out grants to those EPPs. Now that will take some time, right? To work that. That's not an immediate solution because you're gonna, it takes 4 years to get a bachelor's degree. But I think that will pay dividends down the road. The state has also worked with the deans of the educator preparation program. So the Department of Education and the Department of Higher Education are meeting on a monthly basis with deans of the educator preparation programs on this topic specifically. What are things we can do to better, recruit individuals into their programs? I could probably go on and on, but I'll maybe give others.
No, go ahead.
And then the other thing, is we are looking at, we created worked to create an educator job board to make it easier for districts to post kind of across the state their positions and kind of hopefully serve as a one-stop shop for individuals to look for jobs kind of across the state. And we're also looking at what we can do to support grow your own programs. So that's for districts, looking to we kind of look at grow your own from two different perspectives. One, from that growing your high school students. There's still lots of data that says, I think it's like 80, or I can't remember the exact number, a large percentage of people teach within like 30 miles of where they went to high school. And so investments by districts in growing their own high school students into being their teachers will pay dividends. There are programs out there, kind of like Future Farmers of America. With Ed Rising is the big teacher one in Ohio that districts can use to help grow their own, as well as growing their employees. So, those paraprofessionals that want to ultimately become teachers. That's a big, at the state level, one we're looking at is what can we do to the licensure pathways to make it easier for those individuals to grow from being a paraprofessional to becoming a teacher. And so we're really focused on that grow your own from both of those perspectives to help districts be successful in recruiting it.
Two follow-ups based upon that.
Sure.
How is the state getting the message across, number one, and two, are districts taking advantage of these programs?
So the office, I'm in the Office of Educator Licensure. There's an Office of Educator Effectiveness. And their office supports the grow your own initiatives and programs. And they actually have a coordinator this is kind of what they do. And I think she works with districts to if they're interested in getting programs set up, helping them with what's available. So I think it's kind of on a district by district basis. I think that those programs are growing across the state. And I think if we can, especially if we can better tailor our licensure pathways to support grow your own, which is what we're hoping to do, I think that may make it even easier for districts to consider those.
Thanks. Jeff, I'm going to turn to you. From your perspective as a union leader, how can you recruit candidates who are, have left the profession, are, ones that want to return, are, young college students, are, people looking at teaching as a second profession? What's a union doing?
Well, I could tell you about our Educators Leading the Profession program. We're doing a pilot in Lima where we're trying to make improvements or show that we have an idea how to improve the teacher evaluation system. I could talk about our Pathways program where we're trying to recruit, retain educators of color, working with Eastern Gateway and Central State University. And we've partnered with actually the Ohio Federation of Teachers, which is where Karen's educators belong. They're in the other competing union, not the Ohio Education Association. But I mean, let's keep it real. Why aren't people considering going into education? You look across Ohio, the number of students in our colleges and universities, they're down. They're not choosing education as a major. I mean, why is that? In my opinion, it's because the education profession has become a political football. If you watch the nightly news, you'll see the news clips aren't favorable. You know, in Ohio, we've made school funding a political football. School funding in Ohio used to be declared or was declared unconstitutional for 25 years. We really didn't do anything about it. And a year ago, we got the Fair School Funding Plan, and it was incorporated into the state budget. It will be in there this year, and we'll have to go to battle over it again because it's a 6-year phase-in. We got the initial 2 years, but it's a 6-year phase-in period. And I imagine we'll have to go back to our legislators and battle over continuing funding that properly. You look at the nightly news, there are rowdy school board meetings over CRT issues and honesty in education. Teachers want to teach their students what's happened honestly. Our kids are smart. They have the internet. Things have happened. We want the ability to teach our kids honestly. And the other thing is, legislators constantly, there are some legislators, I can't lump them all in the same bucket, but there are some legislators that are critical of schools because they believe that educators are teaching kindergarten through 3rd graders about sexual orientation and gender identity. They're not. I have a news update for those legislators that think that. And you just have to look at proposed pieces of legislation to know that there are legislators out there like that. For number one, the process is that the State Board of Education passes standards and the local school board passes the curriculum to align to those standards. And anybody that wants to look at any single one of those standards or curricula individually, you're not going to find those things that I mentioned. We're not teaching 3rd graders about sexual orientation or gender identity. So number one, let's go back to lifting up the profession as an honorable profession and highlight it and lift it up instead of making it a political football that winds up on the news. We've got great people. I know why I went into education. My brother was a math teacher in Euclid. He's a retired math teacher now. I'm the youngest of 5. Okay, so my brother's already retired. My sister is a retired French teacher. I'm an educator. I'm a math teacher. You know, so I come from a family. There are 5 kids. 3 of us went into the education profession because it was lifted up. My family thought that was the way to go. Be a teacher. It's a great job. Teachers are great. Let's support our teachers. So I think we need to go back to lifting up this profession instead of being critical and lying about it on the nightly news.
Thanks. Now, you know, not if you had a magic wand, but you talked about the problems. Let's talk about solutions, possible solutions from the OEA's perspective. How do we get there? How do we work with the legislature to make necessary changes to make the teaching profession something that people want to do again, are proud of?
Yeah, I think we just continue to make as many friends as we can in the legislature, and we have many. You know, I mentioned earlier that a year ago, when they passed the state budget, we were able to get the Fair School Funding Plan incorporated into the state budget, which gets passed. You know, the state budget, I don't know, I didn't know this before I had this job because I'm not a social studies teacher, but the state budget is the only piece of legislation that is required to pass by law by the state constitution. So if we did not have pro-public education legislators in Ohio, we wouldn't have gotten the Fair School Funding Plan passed. They realized it was a problem. It was called Cupp-Patterson. It was a bipartisan piece of legislation. Bob Cupp, the Republican, and John Patterson, the Democrat, were working on this for a long time. So it made sense at the time. You know the breakdown of our legislature in Ohio. We've got Republicans outnumber Democrats in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So again, I'll go back to common sense legislators that understand the dynamics in Ohio. We have those friends, or we would never gotten some of the legislation that passed that we did, like I mentioned earlier, the Fair School Funding Plan. So we need to continue to educate. We need to continue to advocate for our allies in the legislature, and we just need to elect more legislators that are pro-public education friendly. And we'll have a chance to do that this November.
Thanks, Jeff. Karen, from your perspective.
Yeah, so Jeff laid out the advocacy legislative pathway, which I agree. I mean, I don't think you could ask for a more valued profession. We are in a public, whether you're a public or a private, I'm more prone to the public sector. But I think in terms of recruiting, one of the lessons that we learned, building off of what Tom shared earlier a few years back, we realized we weren't doing a good job in recruiting who we are and who is the community that you're joining, and recruiting a diverse workforce, and really shaking things up and changing how we do things. And I think the law profession is an example, or is a good example. When you are a summer intern at a law firm, you get to know the community, meet with the other attorneys, and really understand the profession that you're entering. And I think in education, it's like you get hired, you show up, you may have a one-day orientation, and your school becomes your only point of view. In urban education, we're a small enterprise. We're 8,000 employees strong. We have an opportunity to, when you join the CMSD family, to connect with other people that have joined at the same time. And so we've spent a lot of time, and it's time and energy, not necessarily money, but time in creating a community. So when you join, we'll have, we just had our most recent one, our new hire back to school night, and it was down at, I'm not sure where it is, but I'll just say public hall. It was at public hall. It's usually at an event, at a venue where you can just go break some bread, meet the other colleagues who have joined. We've built pipelines to, again, continue to grow within. So paraprofessional, if you're a paraprofessional, you're invested in working with children, you have a curiosity. And so we wanted to build a pipeline, and we have a pipeline where you can then go through and get your teaching degree while working as a paraprofessional. And so getting creative in that way. But I think the biggest thing is, when we think of our HR department, we call them our talent department. We really are working to procure talent and then build a sense of community. And so doing things on a district level, as well as what you do at your school level, helps build that sense of belonging, and that you are becoming part of the CMSD family. And so that's been really important. And then on the other end, I may be a classroom teacher, but want to look at other opportunities. And so we have partnered with Cleveland State University and outside partners to build our principal pipeline. Because what a great opportunity to have a teacher that is invested in the district, but then wants to go on to the next level in their education journey, which is to be a building leader. And so we've probably, our principal placement has been much easier because we've had a more robust pool to pull from that have gone through that pipeline, and then they become principals within our district. So.
Thanks, Karen. You guys all mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion. When I went to school, I didn't have a lot of people that looked like me in front of me teaching me. And I know that was the case for a lot of Latino and Mexican kids as well, where I went to school. House Bill 583, do you think it provides an opportunity for more kids to see people that look like them or share their experience? Not just based upon race, but based upon experiences too. For kids that live in a rural area, who grew up on a farm, to see someone who had shared similar experiences with them, or to see a Mexican kid who came from Texas or Mexico and families started working in the farms. Do you think this provides them with the opportunity to see people like them actually teaching them and showing them there is a pathway to some success? I'll just open it up to you, for all three of you to comment on that.
Sure, I'll jump first. I'm looking at the guy. I think, Adrian, I think anytime you have an opportunity to see someone like me that you can connect with, that creates for a richer experience. It's not by chance that we have I'm proud of this statistic, we have the highest number of females in computer science classes, high school students taking computer science classes in the district across the state, because we've worked really hard to get partnerships with individuals that look like me, a young Black female who may be an engineer, a computer science specialist, or a male. Having that connection allows you to see that it may spark the interest, or I'm interested in that. You also have to be intentional about recruitment. We had for years a high school program that grew our own teachers, and then following from high school students to go into the teaching profession. And then your hope is they come back and teach in the district. Collinwood started the first program, and then we had it at some of our high schools. And for those students to come back and teach within Cleveland, then they expand their sphere of influence and help with recruiting. We find our best recruiters, we talk to our young teachers, are you interested? Would you like to come out and recruit? And we'll go back to their university and do recruitment. So being creative about how you think about and how you recruit to get diversity in your workforce is what we need.
Thanks, Karen. Jeff, from the unit's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Adrian, the short answer is yes. If you look at school districts, typically, like for example, I taught Parma City Schools for 26 years. Typically, the members who are in the classified unit, that would be your bus drivers, your paraprofessionals, custodians, school secretaries. The numbers, overwhelmingly, those individuals who are hired by a school district come from the community. 75, 78% of those individuals live in those communities where they're working in those schools. And for the teaching staff, traditionally, those numbers aren't that high. So this, as you've mentioned, will give an opportunity for communities to reach out to their members and bring them into the schools with this piece of legislation for the next 2 years, and hopefully build those relationships, support them through their substitute teaching. And it's on the classroom teachers too. I know, like I said, I've been in this gig as a vice president. It's starting my 4th year. I would go into the school secretary after I was out for a day, and I didn't miss many days, Adrian, but if I did miss a day, I'd go in and I'd be like, okay, how did it go? Who did I have as a sub? And I always, and you know, by the reaction, I'd be like, uh-oh, or I'd be like, oh yeah, I had the super sub. Okay, great. But it's an opportunity for veteran teachers to make sure that they have, the substitutes have good experiences where in the schools that day, whether it's making sure they have a manageable lesson plan for the day, making sure the keys are there, making sure directions to important things like the teacher workroom or the restrooms are there, just so they have a good experience. So yes, I believe, in short, for the next 2 years, I believe it's an opportunity to do just that, recruit more members of the community to get into the schools and be interested in becoming classroom teachers.
Thanks, Jeff. Tom, from your perspective, I know the state recently put out a report on diversity, equity, inclusion in classroom, increasing diversity. What's the state's perspective? ODE, I won't say the state.
Yes, I think I agree with Karen and Jeff, and I would say that, you know, in the work that we have done, one of the things I think that we've come to realize, one of those truths that we've come to realize, is that any initiative that we have or any work that we do to increase educator diversity is by definition also addressing educator shortage. So, you know, when we have that concern of educator shortage, anything that's going to create more, you know, educators of color or whatever it may be, will also give us more educators, period. And so we kind of get double bang for our buck with those projects. And I mentioned before that we meet every month with the deans of the educator preparation programs, and That's something that they have realized as well. We have 2 sub-work groups in that group, with that group, one that's working on educator shortage and one that's working on diversifying both at the K-12 level and then higher ed level. And what we saw was there was so much overlap between the work of both of those work groups that we need to, that it was, I guess when you stop to think about it, it was plainly obvious, but sometimes you just don't stop to think about it. And so I think that that's the perspective we take into any, when we're looking at whatever we can do to help address both issues.
Thanks. 2 subjects I want to touch on, a little touch. Well, teacher, well, I'll just say attendance and the attendance numbers throughout the state. If you go on, the website, you can see. I won't say it's abysmal, but maybe, what are the reasons for educators not coming to work? And number 2, school safety. Is that a reason? So maybe I'll take the first one first. School safety. It's an issue. It's in our communities. It's happening in our community, and it's affecting what's happening in the classrooms from my perspective. How do we enhance student safety and teacher safety and educator safety in our schools in Ohio? What do we do? I'll let anyone start. It's a tough one. So.
I'll take first attempt. It is an issue. There is money available that has been made by the federal government and the state of Ohio to upgrade your facilities to make sure that educators and students are safe at school. Just to further build on that, it's a team effort. Some of those monies that we've indicated, or I've indicated, we've been advocating that school districts hire more mental health professionals, more school counselors, so they can help our students. You look at all the data throughout the pandemic, kids are suffering. There are some states that have declared the social and emotional well-being of students a crisis, a mental health crisis in their state. I don't think we're any different. We haven't done that in our state just yet, but it's had its effect. It's had its effect on learning, and it's had its effect on the social and emotional well-being of our students. So having more professionals available, again, you go back to the fact that there's a shortage. So we're all clamoring for some of the same individuals to come into our schools. Some schools have decided to go that route and spend money on more professionals, like I indicated, and some have not gone that route. So I just implore schools to have mental health professionals and school counselors available to our kids. And of course, the social and emotional well-being of our educators is imperative as well. And we just have to all work together at looking at warning signs when it comes to our students and who needs some help. So we're in this together, and those things that I indicated are a good start, I believe.
Thanks, Jeff. Karen?
Yeah, and to build on what Jeff was saying, the AR, the FERPA or the ESSER and the ARP funds have allowed districts to think differently about how we support schools. And at Cleveland, we've invested heavily in ensuring we have a health professional in every building. We didn't in the past. That's a key. That's key. We have a family support specialist in every building. Again, social worker by training, which is key to have a pulse on what students and adults are feeling. And then safety and security has been an investment in terms of just looking at our infrastructure. Do we have officers in every building? What type of officers? Obviously, if it's a larger building, we may have multiple officers. If it's a smaller building, you may just have one safety and security, but at least at a minimum, one officer who is part of that team of support. The cameras, making sure we look at metrics, what we call metrics on a regular basis, but making sure all of our cameras are functional and, sound systems are working. Those are key things that help make a school community feel safe. And then I think behind that is, what are those supports? We not only have absenteeism with adults, but we have high absenteeism currently in our district with our students. And so reconnecting with our attendance campaign, and we do call it a campaign, but looking at why people are being absent, what supports are needed, and what can we help to do to support that. Because, you know, sometimes it's a myriad of reasons why, but you don't know that until you get in the community, you meet with the family, you find out what those challenges are. You know, when we first started this, we realized it makes a big difference if I can get a bus at 1 mile versus 1.5 miles, which is what the state requirement is. If you're outside of 1.5 mile, you get a bus. In our community, we found it was important to reduce that to 1, and then have hubs where people could meet to catch a bus. We also, you know, work closely with RTA to get bus passes for our students. And they also have access to the public library system, and their bus passes work. Their swipe card works until 8:30, so they can be involved in activities. So thinking about all of those things that keep students connected to the school helps. But safety has been one of the #1 issues. And we are actually, while we were talking, the schedule popped up on my calendar. We're doing a code red with all of our schools where you do that active participation. All of our schools are doing that this year as a part of the restart. You know, you can do a code blue or some of the other things, but we're doing the code red where you're doing an active event. Crisis is happening so that the students and the staff are able to practice it and feel comfortable. And it also allows us to see, what do we need to shore up? Where do we need to be a little stronger? Not space you want to be in all the time, but it is important that you do it. And so our chief of safety and security, Mr. Dotson, Chief Dotson is doing just a really nice job. And just like we did teacher pipeline, we need more safety and security. And so we have an OPADA certified instructor in our career and technical program for students in the public safety sector. We want to grow our own safety and security officers to understand Cleveland and our social emotional learning standards that we have and expectations that we have. And so we had our first class of, I believe, 8. They just came in off the street. They didn't have their OPADA certification, and they're going through our safety and security training. We'll do their student teaching in a sense in our school with a seasoned officer. And so this is just another way that we're working with the state to get the approval to build our own safety and security force, or to add to it without having you have to come in with the licensure. But if you want to be employed by the district, we'll take you through the training, and then you'll become a security officer within our district.
Thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Time, we're at 1:12, but I want to ask one last question for everyone. I know House Bill 583, I think it's a pilot program, it's going to last until 2024, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to what are we going to do after that? Are we going to look at the data and see if it's working or not? Or what are we going to do? What's the plan, Tom?
Okay, you can see I was ready to answer. So with this, the other portion of this bill is that the legislature set up a study committee to look at substitute teacher licensure. So I think while these 2 years are going on, it will be the goal of the legislature to sort of determine what the long-term solution will be. I assume that they will, look to the department, to the unions, to the districts for advice as to what the long-term would be. I really can't guess. I couldn't even begin to guess what the future may hold. That group has not even gotten, started. I think they have not yet started to get together to meet. So I don't think, we just don't have any tea leaves to read yet. But
I'm going to ask you guys to read the tea leaves, though. So my last question. So go ahead. If I had, this is merely hazarding a guess on my part. I think that potentially, maybe they may be looking at, leaving this sort of option in place
but only on a short-term basis. So there's short-term subbing assignments and long-term subbing assignments. And how those are defined it probably differs by state, by district, lots of things, but I think we can think in our heads, right? There's the short term is the one that my teacher's sick today, so they bring in an individual who's going to teach me for this one day, and my teacher will be back tomorrow. And then long-term summing would be, we don't have maybe someone's out, maybe they had a medical emergency, or they're going to be out for a long time, or in some cases a district just cannot find an educator for that spot. And so if I had to guess, and like I said, this is just Tom hazarding his own guess, I'm wondering if maybe they'll kind of, those individuals who don't have a bachelor's degree, they'll keep in the classroom, but maybe on more of a short-term basis, while leaving the long-term assignments to those individuals who have a bachelor's degree. If I had to guess, that's what my guess would be.
Right.
But it's only that.
That's good. Appreciate it. Jeff, Karen, you guys have been in this battle for many years, doing the work for 30 years, probably over 30 years. Where do you see the state of public education in 5 years from now?
I'll be retired. No, I'm kidding. I think as with anything, there are opportunities. I really hope, and I do think this is going to be a change in how public education is funded. But what I appreciate about the ESSER funding and the ARP funding is we are able to really look at our school community and think about where we need to make investments and how do we support learning. And it shouldn't be, this is one of those, I call them episodic events. It shouldn't be episodic. If we're going to fund education and we value education, then we need to fund education differently. And part of it is making sure that you have the supports so that as a teacher, I can teach. I'm not having to do coverage here, or I'm not having to do this over here, but I am really engaged in learning with my learning, because there are counselors that are in the building to do the counseling. There are administrators that are in the building to do the administrating. And I think right now we're at this stretching point where we have holes. And we don't have all of the staff that we need, or all of the employees that we need. And you've heard from all three of us creative ways that districts are approaching it, the state is approaching it, and the State Teachers Association is approaching it. But at some point we have to fund education in a meaningful way that provides all of the supports that a school community should have to ensure a student's success as they're going through. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we all face, deficits in funding. We're good for the next few years, but beyond that, we're gonna have a cliff. And we've got to think about what's going to go away, what's going to stay, and that's the unevenness of education. So I think it will continue to be an up and down. If I were to look in the tea lead, it's going to continue to be an up and down, an ebb and flow, until we have some sustainability in how we fund education for our students and families.
Thanks, Karen. Jeff, before I get to you, there was a question in the Q&A about use of veterans in the classroom. Your thoughts on that, three of you?
I support putting highly qualified, well-trained educators in the building. So if there is a veteran that has that training and checks that box, please go into education.
Thanks, Jeff. Tom, isn't there currently a opportunity, a pathway for veterans to actually serve as classroom teachers?
Yes, the department does a lot. We try to do a lot to support veterans. First of all, we waive all of the licensure fees for both active duty spouses and veterans. So there's no cost to apply for the license itself. We also have we have a gentleman here at the department who that's what he does. That's his position, is supporting, you know, veterans in transitioning to teaching. So they actually have a contact person that will help them kind of through every step of the process. We are always looking for opportunities to expand access for veterans, and we would like, you know, nothing more than to bring as many as that want to come into education, that to make the pathway as easy and smooth for them to get into education.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to build upon that, if I might, Adrian, just real quick,
Yes.
is that, you know, I highlighted, I taught math in Parma for 26 years at Hillside, Normandy High School, and the last 18 years at Parma Senior High School. And every step of the way, there were veterans on our teaching staff. They were in Army, Navy, Air Force. But the most important thing about that is that they went through the proper channels to get the proper certification and the training to be in the classroom. They didn't just step off of the curb and say, hey, oh, by the way, maybe I'll be a history teacher because I'm a veteran. No, they went and got the proper training and got certified and were great teachers.
Yeah, I think the vets, that program is a good example. And I think some of the flexibilities, Adrian, that we're seeing now, anytime you can have the space where someone has an interest, they're willing to go through the pathway training component while teaching with supports around them, that's a recipe for success. And so as long as we're able to have flexibilities to have an onboarding program, Career and Technical Education has done it for years. You can bring somebody in from the industry. They may not have the pedagogy training in terms of the construct of lesson planning and the fundamentals of teaching, but they have the life experience in that industry for which you're bringing them on board to. And I think that's been a great example where I have a passion of this welding that I've done for years, and now I would like to give back and teach. So I go through a teaching program while teaching under an alternative licensure in the district. So I'm taking the courses, but I'm also being paid as a fully fledged teacher while I'm doing this. And I believe it's over the course of, I may be dating myself, Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's over the course of 4 years, you can get your credential or licensure in teaching, but you're working for those 4 years. That's I think a great example of the more we can do that type of creativity, the better off we'll be to get people that want to make a second career choice or a change to come into education, not just leave education, but come back into education.
It's 2 years now, but
Okay.
Otherwise you go hit it spot on. So thank you.
I'm dating myself. Okay.
And it kind of goes back to too, I think it's not just a matter of recruitment, but also retaining individuals. And if you throw someone into a situation that you haven't prepared them for, they're not going to stay. And so I think, you know, putting, you know, pathways, licensure pathways, programs together that will support someone so that they will be successful when they walk into the classroom is crucial. Otherwise, you may have created an educator, but they're going to have a frustrating year. Their students are going to have a frustrating year, and you know, at the end of the day, nobody has really been served. So I think that's that key component whenever looking at that kind of licensure flexibility is how can we support them to get there.
All right. I'm going to ask you guys in 2 words, each of you describe the quality, what makes an effective teacher. What, you know, you can use your own personal experience, but what 2 words that describe an effective teacher. Jeff, I'll start with you.
I alluded to it earlier. You have to make relationships is 1 word, right? You have to be willing to make connections, make relationships. And the second is that you have to have a passion to do it. You have to have a passion that you like hanging out with students all day. So relationships and the passion to be an educator.
Karen.
Curiosity. Yeah. Curiosity. And relationships matter. but a curiosity to learn.
Thank you. Tom?
I would say, yeah, caring, right? You gotta be invested, to be that, in your students, in your district. And I think also, I don't like, I'm trying to think of another good word that doesn't duplicate what you all already said. I think skilled was the word that came to my mind. Somebody who's got the knowledge and the experience to successfully teach. The teaching is not, I think that lesson we learned at the beginning of the pandemic is that teaching anybody to do anything is really hard. And I feel like somewhat over the last 2 years, we've sort of forgotten that. And I think we should always keep that in mind, that teaching itself is an art and a skill, that, it's not just anybody can do it without any training or experience.
Thanks. Siobhan, I see you. I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, thank you, Adrian. Thank you to our panel for being here today. Thanks, Tom, Jeff, and Karen for providing great insight and the conversation. Thank you for tuning in via Facebook Live. If you are here for CLE credit, please make sure that you check your email for the survey that will follow the conclusion of today's presentation. One thing we did want to add is that we heard a little about the Say Yes to Education program from Karen, and I wanted to give just a small bit of information that the Say Yes to Education does have a legal promise that the CMBA and community partners are very much so invested in. The promise is to offer access to legal advice or representation for civil matters for CMSD students and families. Those families of support specialists that are also social workers and are housed in those CMSD buildings, send those referrals to us. And if you're interested in learning more about the Say Yes legal promise, please contact the CMBA for more information. We're always in need of volunteers and looking for those to help support that program. And with that, we will conclude today's presentation. And again, thank our panelists and our moderator, Adrian, for being with us. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.